Great. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here to share about our film and creative practice research project, Left, Right, Hook. As Cara mentioned, we do have a content warning as we are going to talk about themes of childhood sexual abuse and trauma. And we really understand if you need to tap out at any time. We won't be offended if you need to leave the room. So my name's Shannon Owen. I'm the writer, director, producer, researcher and lecturer, as was mentioned at the School of Film and Television at the Faculty of Fine Art and Music. Before we get stuck into the specifics of the project, we wanted to briefly talk about the various co-terminologies across disciplines: co-design, co-production, co-creation, and how we position our work in Left, Right, Hook in relation to these terms. So all three approaches attempt to address power imbalances in knowledge generation, application, and dissemination, often with a view to enhance social inclusion. Within creative practice research, the terms co-production and co-creation are more common than co-design, largely because projects in our discipline are generally focused on making or creating creative works. So we position the creative practice research elements of Left, Right, Hook as co-creation. And here we borrow the working definition produced by Katerina Cizik and William Uricchio at the MIT Open Documentary Lab. I'll just have a read of this definition on screen. Co-creation offers alternatives to a single author vision. It involves a constellation of media production methods, frameworks, and feedback systems. In co-creation, projects emerge from a process and evolve from within communities and with people, rather than for or about them. Co-creation also spans across and beyond disciplines and organisations, and can also involve non-human or beyond human systems. The concept of co-creation reframes the ethics of who creates how and why. Our research shows, that is Katerina's, Cizik's and Uricchio's, but also Donna and mine, that co-creation interprets the world and seeks to change it through a lens of equity and justice. So to Left, Right, Hook, over to you, Donna.
Thanks, Shannon. I set up Left, Right, Hook in 2019 in a grassroots way at my local boxing gym. And the project began as a workshop program that combined expressive writing and non-contact trauma-informed boxing for women-identified adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse and trauma. I'd been drawn to boxing as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse simply because I felt angry. And I knew the anger was connected to my abuse, and I wanted to find a way to release the emotions in a safe way. And I fell in love with boxing, and I just found that the sport aided my own healing and recovery along with therapy and other tools, and writing was one of those tools. But I found that when writing about my trauma, it made me really sleepy. And so pairing writing with boxing gave the words and feelings energy and movement. So using my own experiences, along with self-driven research around trauma-informed approaches, I designed the workshop to run in 2-hour sessions across 8 weeks. The focus of the first hour is on free writing to prompts and sharing, and the second hour involves learning and practicing boxing as a way to release stored emotions and increase empowerment. With my producer research hat on, I invited Shannon to come and observe one of the very early workshops to see if there was potential for a documentary film.
So I vividly remember attending those early workshops, the goosebumps when one of the participants shared her writing, and the feeling of anxiety when another declared before she read from her notepad that she had no idea what had come onto the page during the free writing sessions. The way the energy in the room shifted once the boxing drills began, and the sense of release by the end of the session. It was really, really incredible to witness. It became clear from the outset that the success of any film project, in part, rested on the participants knowing that they had agency in relation to their involvement in the project. Here, Donna and myself developed a trauma-informed production framework that drew on Donna's lived experiences as a survivor, as well as her own research into trauma-informed practices. And these aligned quite naturally with the processes of ethically engaged filmmaking that was central to my own documentary practice. And here the work of Steve Thomas in his scholarly articulation of processes of ethically engaged documentary practice that aim to empower the participants through a collaborative sharing of experiences was really influential. And this framework foregrounds participants' safety, participants' agency, deep listening, and meaningful consultation.
In 2020, Shannon and I took the project into the University of Melbourne research space, and we teamed up with interdisciplinary research team from the creative arts and psychological sciences. Here again, my lived experience became central to the development and realisation of this research. Cultivating lived experience is central to co-design work, as we've heard today, as it positions survivors as researchers of their own narrative rather than as subjects to be researched. It thus returns power to the survivor. And we set out with two creative practice research intentions. The first was to consider producing a book of writings generated from the workshop. The second was to film the workshop with the view to produce a long-form documentary film. But we also wanted to analyse and publish the well-being and psychological effects on the participants through their participation in an 8-week workshop. And so this aspect was funded in part by the Creativity and Wellbeing Research Institute at the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. And even that aspect was less about co-creation or co-design, but for us it was important to demonstrate evidence-based research support for what we knew intrinsically was the positive outcomes of the program on the participants' wellbeing. And the research data positively demonstrated a reduction in PTSD, stress, depression, and an increase in personal agency and resilience. The themes that were pulled out from an analysis of the writings included empowerment, connection, disconnection, validation, and having an observational documentary camera in these early workshops. It offered an opportunity to bear witness to the participants' experiences, and that became, over time, an increasingly empowering aspect of our project.
So our co-creation framework centred around relational ethics.
11 already. 快点，要。Sorry.
Hopefully someone can mute.
Yeah. As I was saying, our co-creation framework centred around relational ethics. Production processes were iterative and really evolved as the film developed. We had an opt-in, opt-out process at each stage of the production and collaborated with participants when developing each kind of creative idea at each stage. At the outset, a briefing was held prior to the first workshop, where, along with explaining the formal research ethics documents, participants were asked to sign a participant release form, which is kind of quite common in the film industry. And in this, we outlined our intention for the film and terms for meaningful consultation and editorial decisions. The first two workshops were recorded using an observational filming approach. This means that although it was clear there was a camera, sound recordist and director in the room, we worked with as a very small crew. We really didn't intervene in the space. Instead, the camera was there to observe and bear witness to the survivors' journeys. We also invited participants quite early on to record video diaries. This was an iterative and emergent form of creative collaboration and really set the scene for that more collaborative approach. The video diaries were an open, voluntary and creative invitation for participants to record themselves and or their surrounds at moments they saw fit during the program. So our initial plan was to film across the 8 weeks of Donna's program, but 2 weeks in, pandemic lockdowns kicked in. So our initial plans were somewhat thwarted. Donna pivoted the program online, and some of the group continued to engage with doing video diaries, and these ended up being a really interesting component of the finished film. But filming as such was stalled early on in 2020, and it wasn't until the end of 2020 that we were able to come back together as the small film crew and participant team. But by this time, the group had generated an incredible body of writing because they'd been in the program 3 times across the course of 2020. Donna brought the idea of co-creating the writings and turning them into a book at the end of 2020. And I began to consider the ways we could use some of these writings in the film.
Our participants came from a range of functional backgrounds. Everyone was keen to have their writing featured in the book. 5 of the group opted into being actively involved in curating it. 2 of the group members had PhDs in the workshops. So I decided to work with these members to co-author an article for Text Journal about writing and boxing as a reflective and poetic account of our experiences in the program. We then were invited to contribute to a chapter in a book about the intersections between sport and art to be published by spring of this year. And for me, writing with the survivors, not about them, was a really deliberate choice to centre the survivor as a researcher of their own narrative rather than as a subject to be researched. And I involved the participants in opportunities to talk about the project as much as possible, from being on podcasts to radio interviews. And the project was about amplifying survivor voices. So these opportunities became moments of restoring agency through the creative process.
So while the book co-creation was going on, I began to develop the idea of introducing more performative filmmaking devices into the project as a way of bringing the creative writing produced in the workshops to the screen. The participants bravely agreed to step into this space of creative experimentation with me, and I'm inherently grateful to them for this. We did this incrementally. Firstly, we worked with dramaturg Rinsky Ginsberg to deliver filmed spoken word performances of specific writings that I had selected. And at this point, the transformational aspect of co-creative filmmaking processes started to become more apparent as participants were empowered to shape the delivery of their stories through these spoken word performances. So we shifted from that more observational approach to a much more engaged approach where the participants were actively engaged in their representation. We then began to work with the participants to develop poetic visual treatments of specific extracts of their writing. Here I would propose a piece of writing and a visual idea, and alongside Donna, we would work with the participants to shape this further. To give you an example, one of the participants, Claire, is both a poet and an academic who writes and thinks a lot about fractured narratives and the power of restorying. We played with various ideas about how to incorporate, her thoughts and her writing visually on the screen. We've thought about text installations, initially very digitally driven with projections into a space before settling on a more analog approach, which you can see in this slide, in which Claire filled a room with her handwritten poetry. It was important for us that the filmed elements maintained the production value to sustain a theatrically released film. We had quite a significant amount of funding to produce this film, and it was going to end up in cinemas. So here a view of co-creation as a spectrum really helped inform the production process. Borrowing again from the MIT Open Documentary Lab, this view of co-creation as a meter that can move across a spectrum of a collaboration allowed us to draw on specific areas of expertise as we moved through the production pipeline. In this way, we could support the participants' engagement in the production process by bringing in skilled crew at different stages of the production to enable the realisation of these creative ideas.
Left Right Hook has been both an incredible and challenging project to be involved in. The commitment from the participants to engage has been inspiring, and we believe this has been due to their active engagement in the process and our commitment to creating a relational space for healing. Sexual abuse impacts our relationships and relational understanding of ourselves, others, and the world we live in. In doing this research, I've discovered the need to actively commit to creating a space for this. And so I held fortnightly check-in Zoom meetings for 18 months of the project to allow each survivor to check in about how they were feeling and share what was going on with them. And I used those moments as opportunities to share about the marketing of the book and the documentary. So this continuity, connection and holding of space was vital to the project overall, and it did help us to maintain emotional and psychological safety. But as time has gone on, there have been challenges, and they've been to do with capacity, evolving expectations, transference, burnout, through to questions around power, authorship, and positionality.
So knowledge has been co-constructed throughout the process of making the Left Right Hook documentary and in the acts of creative expression. Scholars Kishore and Stiff question the strengths and weaknesses of this type of research, where the participants become a collaborator and stakeholder in the project through these dialogic encounters. In Left Right Hook, consent was a dynamic process. We checked in with participants at each stage of the research and filming to ensure they still felt comfortable participating. There was a process of meaningful consultation at various stages of the film edit, where participants could identify any aspects of the film they were uncomfortable with, and whereby the team undertook to address these concerns. However, from the outset, we did make it clear to the group our intentions to publicly release the film through various distribution channels, and that there would come a point in the project where no further changes could be made. They could no longer withdraw from the project. At the heart of our process, we really attempted to empower participants at each and every stage. And this has been an emergent process, as I mentioned earlier, as we navigated the process of filmmaking and research, along with the marketplace and the expectations of the marketplace and their industrialized methods. The locus of control in filmmaking can shift as it becomes mediated by funding bodies, a production company, distributors, and sales agents, along with an audience or audiences who interpret and critique the work. These, I think, were the biggest tensions for us as filmmakers as we attempted to adopt a set of methods and mindsets through a co-creative iterative process. But yet we're still bound by structural levels and shifts.
We were fighting a bit this morning.
Agency.
I'll just
So good job
wait.
you didn't walk in.
Thank you. So I think perhaps our biggest takeouts, and are very similar across what I've heard this morning, is that in this type of research, as participants gain more agency, their definitions of feminist concerns can become different. Without an agreed set of definitions up front, there can be a confusion of practices and approaches. Questions around author subject may continually shift. Once a film is complete, the work is fixed, yet the process of engagement remains volatile as the work then meets an audience through a new set of objectives revealed through the marketing, publicity, and distribution phase. And in a project like Left Right Hook, this is an incredible load to place on a survivor who may be navigating and wrestling with complex personal feelings about their representation, vulnerability, and exposure. To expect each participant to remain actively engaged in the process of collaboration and decision-making is perhaps a burden too big. Further questions remain for us around how to balance shifting expectations in dynamic and iterative creative practice research, and how to navigate the tensions between public dissemination of research and work when there are competing agendas from stakeholders.
And we're really at the beginning of this kind of next phase of the project, the kind of marketing and distribution. The film will premiere locally at the Melbourne International Film Festival in August 2024. So we're beginning to do a lot of work around kind of navigating and managing those tensions between kind of vulnerability and visibility of putting this work out into the world.